The media and Hollywood love to throw around the word psychopath. It's a very convenient stock term for anyone who is bad or criminal, or as a very underwhelming 2D backstory for a movie antagonist. But what if I told you psychopaths don't actually exist? Confused? Come with me. Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk the realities of psychopaths. Sam, why are you doing a video on psychopaths when this is the death channel, you ask? Now I'm aware that the rationale behind this one is thin at best, but be it that a large chunk of the public believes that psychopaths are murderers, murders lead to victims, victims lead to death, and we're a death channel, that is the very thin line that we're working with here. So work with me, we only need it for the next 30 seconds or so. And if all else fails, it's Gary's fault. What's in a name? Before we go on, we need to cover the elephant in the room. The fact that psychopaths and sociopaths aren't a thing. Yes, I said it in the introduction to get your attention, but those words actually mean nothing in a clinical sense. They are layman's terms, just like insane or split personality. They're not diagnoses. And before one of you pipes up in the comments with, but in court you can say guilty by reason of insanity, so insanity must be real. What makes you insane by legal definition still doesn't make you insane by diagnostic term. The further down the rabbit hole you go, the more you will realize that the legal and medical terms don't always align. But back to the unfortunate psychopath-sociopath wording. The actual diagnostic term is Antisocial Personality Disorder, ASPD. So why do we all know the word psychopath if it was never real? That's a good question. A lot of people think nowadays that we know everything about everything, which is absolute rubbish. We know barely anything about how the brain works, for example. But before we could name and define the things that we know today, we first had to discover, document, analyze, realize we went down the wrong path, correct ourselves, refine, realign, rephrase. Before you can submit a diagnosis and name it, you have to work out what it is you're looking at. Find similarities and differences between cases and then build criteria. At the beginning, you don't know what you're looking at, so you slap a random placeholder name on the file. In the early 1900s, psychologists and psychiatrists were already using the terms like psychopath to describe people who lacked empathy, were manipulative, and had criminal tendencies, because there wasn't an actual term for it yet. Keep in mind, back in the 1800s and the early 1900s, offending someone by using a particular word wasn't exactly a concern. The word psychopathy comes from the Greek word psyche, meaning soul or mind, and pathy, meaning suffering or illness. It was first used by German psychiatrists in the 1800s simply as a general term for what we would now call a mental disorder. That's also where we get psychopathology, the study of mental disorders. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the term psychopathic inferiority started being used to describe what we would now likely call a personality disorder. Back then, it also included many diagnoses that we classify differently now, or we don't classify as a mental disorder at all. Labels like constitutional psychopaths or psychopathic personalities were thrown around loosely, often slapped on to anyone who was morally suspect, criminal, or just socially undesirable. The term sociopath came a bit later, around 1930, thanks to American psychologist George E. Partridge. He introduced it to highlight the social aspect, focusing on people who consistently broke social rules and hurt others in the process. Over time, psychopathy narrowed down to mean similar things, shaped by Scottish psychiatrists and later American and Canadian researchers who created checklists of traits like criminality, lack of empathy, and in some cases, manipulative charm and professional success. Take note here that back then they assumed criminality would be part of the diagnosis. It's not, but keep that in mind for later. Eventually, the psychiatric field landed on a more structured diagnosis, Antisocial Personality Disorder, or Dissocial Personality Disorder in some countries. But by then, the terms psychopath and sociopath had already taken off into pop culture and stuck in the public's imagination, especially when it came to crime shows, thrillers, and dramatic headlines. Let's be real, the term Antisocial Personality Disorder doesn't really roll off the tongue with ease. Psychopath also implies a certain aura, but is vague enough to let writers and directors take characters into whatever direction they want. And nowadays, demonizing mental health conditions is a no-no. But a psychopath is technically not a diagnosis, so it's an easy loophole. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at the criteria for ASPD. Diagnostic criteria. Keep in mind, like many diagnoses, antisocial personality disorder is a spectrum. In layman's terms, it can range from mild to extreme. And I'll keep reminding you of that until it sinks in. The DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, lists the criteria for ASPD as 1. The individual is at least 18 years old. 2. There is evidence of conduct disorder with the onset before the age of 15. 3. The antisocial behaviour is not exclusively during schizophrenia or a manic episode. And 4. A persuasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others since the age 15 indicated by 3 or more of the following. Failure to conform to social norms regarding lawful behaviours. Deceitfulness, meaning repeated lying, use of aliases or conning others. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Irritability and aggressiveness. Reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Consistent irresponsibility, such as failure to maintain work behaviours or financial obligations. Lack of remorse, being indifferent to or rationalising hurtful behaviour. Notice a few things here. First, lack of empathy isn't mentioned, yet if you ask someone on the street, they would say that's one of the main traits. Second, unlike most diagnoses, you can't be diagnosed with ASPD until you are at least 18, and we'll come back to why a bit later. Third, you only need 3 of the 7 traits to qualify, which means you might not have 4 of them. For instance, someone could be deceitful, reckless, and lack remorse, but still be responsible and non-impulsive. Another person could be irresponsible, reckless, and impulsive, but not deceitful or criminal. Both could be diagnosed with ASPD, but dealing with them would feel very different. Also, you don't need to have committed acts that are ground for arrest. That's just one of the 7 criteria. So why do so many people associate ASPD with criminality? To crime or not to crime? Some people with ASPD are criminals, no question. But a lot of people without ASPD are also criminals, and that's also not up for debate. But when it comes to ASPD and crime, there are 3 lenses to look through: research, media influence, and personal motivation. Let's start with research. Remember earlier when we talked about how the psychiatric community forms a diagnosis? It takes time and research. But back in the 1920s, you couldn't exactly put an ad in the newspaper saying, looking for psychopaths to take a survey. The word was mainly only used in the psychiatric community, not with the general public, and critically, it wasn't a diagnosis yet, so no one knew if they qualified. They had to go where they knew they were candidates, and that was prison. This is how bias in academia occurs, and they were very aware of this. But they had to start somewhere. The early research base was skewed. And remember, if your research is coming from something like an FBI report, it's naturally going to be biased towards criminal behaviour. So early researchers interviewed a wide range of inmates, particularly high-profile murderers that they thought might fit the criteria. And many did, but many didn't. Still, as the research went public, the media naturally grabbed onto it and started telling the public that murderers and psychopaths go hand in hand. Who would have thought the media might jump the gun a little bit? So that's where the research shaped public narrative. The second influence was obviously Hollywood. Have you noticed that the bad guy in movies is often either a psychopath or a Russian? Hollywood has decided that these 2 labels are safe to demonize. Through movies and TVs, we are told that all serial killers are psychopaths, which isn't true. You rarely, if ever, see a positive depiction of a psychopath, much like you rarely see a positive portrayal of a Russian. It's lazy storytelling. Even the news, which in theory is supposed to be factual, often label perpetrators as psychopaths. But again, that's not a diagnostic term, so where are they getting that from? Just assumptions based off actions. In true crime media, you'll often hear phrases like sadistic psychopath, as if the 2 always go hand in hand. But you can be a sadist without being a psychopath. Most sadists have consensual partners and don't commit crimes. Some do, but that's a whole separate video. Finally, the third factor is the wants of those with ASPD. There's a public belief that people with ASPD want to hurt others simply because they lack remorse. That's not how it works. If you ask the general population what they want in life, they'd say something like happiness, career success, family, maybe fame. You won't find many saying, I want to be a serial killer. Most humans, regardless of whether they have ASPD or not, don't dream of committing horrific acts. People with ASPD still want careers, relationships, adventures. Fearlessness, another ASPD trait, can actually help them achieve big goals like becoming a CEO because they're less hampered by the fear of rejection and failure. And that's almost a superpower right there. Of course, people with ASPD can be more impulsive, irresponsible, and manipulative, which might make them more prone to minor crimes like shoplifting and fraud. And yes, upbringing and environment can greatly impact the kind of person they become. But having a bad home doesn't cause ASPD. The psychiatric community now largely believes that it's brain wiring that you're born with. A bad home life combined with ASPD will usually lead to jail. But a good home life combined with ASPD might lead to ambitious, successful life. A brilliant example of this is James Fallon, the author of The Psychopath Inside. He's a neuroscientist with a great career and family, who later discovered that he had the brain of a psychopath, and suddenly a lot of things in his life made a lot more sense. His book is absolutely fascinating, and it's a 3D look at ASPD, and highly recommended if you're ready to ditch the true crime cliches. And I'll reference that in the description. Why aren't children psychopaths? Now, about that 18-year-old requirement for diagnosis. Why? Well, have you ever met a 5-year-old? Because kids are naturally reckless, impulsive, irresponsible, aggressive, and don't feel bad when they steal a toy. That's just normal childhood behavior. Kids often do some pretty sketchy looking shit. A 5-year-old might punch another kid in the playground, or might steal their lunch and run off laughing. That doesn't mean they have ASPD. Children are in the process of developing their empathy, impulse control, and ability to think about long-term consequences. Their brains, particularly the prefrontal cortex, which governs the decision-making and impulse control, aren't fully developed yet. Diagnosing a personality disorder in a child would be like diagnosing a toddler with a midlife crisis. It doesn't fit because the child hasn't even finished developing into who they are. That said, conduct disorder, which can be diagnosed in minors, is a huge red flag for future ASPD. Conduct disorder is basically a pattern of behavior where a child shows aggression towards people and animals, destruction of property, deceitfulness or theft, and serious violation of rules. Not just once or twice, but persistently over time. If you have conduct disorder and you're showing these traits consistently before the age of 15 and it continues into adulthood, that's when clinicians start to seriously consider ASPD. But again, just being a little shit as a teenager doesn't qualify you. There is a difference between typical teenage rebellion and consistent, deliberate harm to others without remorse. You might also wonder why someone with ASPD wouldn't just grow out of it, like many teenagers grow out of being impulsive idiots. The answer lies in brain structure. Neuroimaging studies show that people with ASPD often have differences in the part of the brain related to emotional regulation, impulse control, and moral reasoning. These differences aren't something you can easily fix with therapy or age. However, both have been known to soften the symptoms. It's not a phase, it's how their brain is wired. That being said, environment still plays a huge role. A person with mild ASPD traits might end up on a very different life path depending on how they're raised, what opportunities they have, and who influences them. A supportive environment can sometimes help someone with ASPD develop better coping strategies and social skills. A toxic, abusive environment can push them towards crime, violence, and substance abuse. It's also important to remember that not everyone with ASPD is dangerous. In fact, most aren't. Many people with ASPD live fairly ordinary lives. You've probably met a few and had no idea. They come across as charming, confident, even magnetic. They might be the life of the party, or they might be the leader at work. They might bend the rules, but so do a lot of people without ASPD. The idea that someone with ASPD must automatically be a violent criminal is simply wrong. And this brings us to another critical point. Not all serial killers, mass murderers, and other notorious criminals have ASPD, and not all people with ASPD are criminals. Serial killers, for example, often involve a unique combination of factors like extreme sadism, narcissism, psychosis, or traumatic brain injury, none of which are the core features of ASPD. Bundling them all together under the label of a psychopath is just really lazy. They can't help it. Now let's talk about something important here, ableism. Yep, we're going there because apparently I know how to piss people off. If you caught our video on narcissistic personality disorder, you probably remember the comment section being flooded with takes like, "They can't help it, it's an illness, you're being mean, they're not in control." And I have no doubt that the same crowd will show up here. So let me make it clear. That is some of the most ableist nonsense I've ever heard. Just because someone with antisocial personality disorder often manipulates doesn't mean they are compelled to. Oh no. They absolutely can control it, and they do it when it benefits them. There is nothing about ASPD or any other personality disorder for that matter that forces someone to lie, cheat or exploit like it's some kind of unstoppable mental compulsion. Yes, it might take more effort, more self-awareness, more emotional labor for them to make that different choice, sure. But they are capable of making that choice. And they will tell you that, and they prove it all the time. So why am I calling you ableist? Because you are assuming, simply from a diagnostic title, without taking into consideration the entire human being, that they can't do something. You are failing to see them as a complex human being. You are shouting this call without anyone in the community asking for you to. That is not advocacy, that's white knighting. It's condescending, it's unhelpful, and honestly, it's insulting. And it is a pattern that we see over and over again when it comes to disabilities and mental health conditions. So I hope I have made my point here. Good, let's move on. Are those with ASPD dangerous? Let's be honest, that's what most people want to know, right? Are those with ASPD dangerous? And the fact is, people who are diagnosed with ASPD are diagnosed for good reason. I'm not here to paint some cute, cuddly, romanticized picture. I'm simply here to give you a three-dimensional layered reality instead of the two-dimensional caricature that you get from a movie or crime documentaries. Some people with ASPD will be dangerous. Some will be dangerous in less obvious ways, not through outright violence, but through manipulation, deception, and small repeated acts of harm that, over time, can be destructive. But the vast majority are not dangerous. They're not out there to get you and kill your puppy. They are regular people going about their regular lives with different brain wiring. They are far more likely to be the CEO of a massive company than they are a serial killer. So next time you hear someone toss around the word psychopath, remember it's a pop culture term, not a diagnosis. The reality of antisocial personality disorder is much more complex and far less dramatic than Hollywood would have you believe. People with ASPD are still people. They are still complex human beings. Some are dangerous, absolutely. Some are annoying, manipulative, or irresponsible. But many just want what everyone else wants: to live their life, succeed, and have some version of happiness. They may go about it a bit differently, but they're still human beings. And with that, go talk death.